to start. Let me first thank you all for being here. We know that you all have busy schedules, so we want to move forward and make very good use of your time. I'm Mark Brown, the Executive Director of the Student Freedom Initiative. I believe I've met most of you in my current role and some of you in my previous role as the Chief Operating Officer at the Department of Education. A couple of administrative things before we get started. You should know that today's session is being recorded. In addition, while there is some time reserved toward the end of our session for questions, you may also ask questions through the chat feature, and either Keith Schultz or I will attempt to answer those in real time or take it for the record and provide the answer soon after this session if necessary. If the question has group applicability, we'll use this same group address system to get the answers back out to all of you. So you see before you kind of a run of show for today, which will run roughly 90 minutes. We'll start with our chairman and founder, Robert Smith, who provides some opening remarks, followed by the president and CEO of UNCF, Dr. Michael Lomax. After that, Keith Schultz and I will get you to the details of today's subject, all of which is going to be framed in the subtext of our role with you as teammates in closing the digital divide. So as we move to the next slide, I want to be very clear about our purpose. At Student Freedom Initiative, what we're doing here is we want to exploit all possible opportunities through partnerships, generous donations of philanthropists, some of which you will meet today, to close the gap in the digital divide, really across the entire ecosystem. We know what that means for wealth in our communities, but we begin with our historical Black colleges and universities. So with that in mind, please join me in welcoming the founder of this vision and the chairman of the Student Freedom Initiative, and the first, I would say, and generous philanthropist in this effort, Mr. Robert F. Smith. Robert, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Hopefully you all can hear me. Good, fantastic. Thank you all for joining us here today, and a very warm welcome to you all, and thank you for all the work that you are doing. You know, today really is a time where we're going to take real steps in closing this digital divide. We all, and I in particular, get a chance to work in this fourth industrial revolution where technology and access to technology is going to be critically important for the sustainability of our community. And one of the elements that we're going to focus on today is how we are taking real steps and real actions to ensure the closure of that digital divide, specifically starting with our historically Black colleges and universities. Because HBCUs continue to serve as pillars within many of our communities, a focus on closing this digital divide will provide some societal benefits and collateral benefits, some of which include enabled shared services across the HBCUs, which have the potential to drive down operating costs dramatically and increase efficiency. Increased resiliency of the infrastructure to preclude some of the cyber attacks, similar to those that have been hit some of our HBCUs over the last several months, and some of you have witnessed and experienced the effect of these cyber attacks on the closure of one of the major pipelines in America. So it's real, it's here, it's now, and has major impact on all of us. We'll focus on creating a resilient virtual campus opportunity where citizens within our community and frankly across the planet have the opportunity to experience elements of the world-class education that you all provide to our students. We will improve access to high-speed, affordable internet to foster more innovation and business growth within our communities, and expansion of the R&D capacity of HBCUs to migrate our 11 R2 research institutions into R1 research institutions and move others into the R1 research institutions within the next 5 years. I'd first like to welcome and thank two of our corporate sponsors, one of which is Cisco, which has agreed to provide $50 million for income contingent financing alternatives to the Parent Plus loans and $100 million in products and services to support the modernization of HBCU infrastructure and maintain the delivered solutions for 12 months. So let me first introduce Francine Katsoudas, who is the EVP, Chief People Policy and Purpose Officer for Cisco. Francine, are you here?
I am. Can you hear me and see me okay?
I can hear you. Now I can see you. If you don't mind, just a few opening comments, I'd appreciate that.
You got it. I want to say thank you, Robert. You know, it's interesting. In this world of virtual meetings, sometimes every day can feel the same. And I would tell you from a Cisco perspective, this is actually a very special day for us. And I'm thrilled to be with all of you today. Our purpose at Cisco is to power an inclusive future for all. And against that backdrop, it was really important for us back in September to create social justice beliefs and actions. And this partnership and this commitment is a big part of how we really demonstrate the actions taken or the actions needed to really address deeply rooted racial inequities. And our goal is to drive change within our company, our communities, our customers, and our partners. And today we are sharing our progress on our commitment to preserve the legacy of historically Black colleges and universities and to really support their strategic recovery. As a company, we care a tremendous amount about the digital divide, and we're so proud to really join the Student Freedom Initiative Endowment, which when fully funded will support 4,500 students on an ongoing basis. And we do this in partnership with Computex Technology Solutions. And Cisco is really committed to modernizing the technology capabilities, supporting the needed compliance efforts at all HBCUs. We have an amazing program in our networking academies, which provides IT education programs and paths to so many students. And I personally have seen how this program has truly changed lives. We are at a moment right now where I think it takes partnership and the coalescence of like-minded companies to drive change, and we're just thrilled to be here. So thank you.
Thank you, Francine. I can't think of a better and more capable partner than Cisco to help us with this enablement of our IT infrastructure across all our HBCUs. And thank you to you and to Chuck, who's become a good friend in this effort to really, frankly, just stabilize, mobilize, and create some equity in access to technology and the new opportunities in the digital environment that we all get a chance to live in. So thanks again. I'd now like to introduce Xavier Williams, who's the CEO of AVC Technologies. AVC Technologies, through Xavier, has agreed to perform the cyber assessments, staging, and installation of the Cisco provided products at no cost to the HBCUs. Also, as an option, to the extent to which HBCUs choose, AVCT is willing to provide long-term maintenance after the initial 12 months, which is provided by Cisco. So Xavier, if you don't mind, we'd love to welcome you into the community here and welcome you to say a few words.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. First, I want to compliment you, Mark Brown, Keith Schultz, and the entire SFI team on the vision and mission that you've put forth with this initiative in helping to close the digital divide. As a longtime supporter of the UNCF and to my friend, Dr. Michael Lomax, I'm very pleased that AVCT, along with our longtime business partner, Cisco, has the opportunity to participate on the technology aspect of this work. While many of you may not be familiar with AVCT, rest assured that we are a company that understands the digital divide and will help you implement technology solutions to close this divide. We are gifting millions of dollars worth of cybersecurity and technology services, essentially providing free services during the first year of implementation for your schools. We are in a position and have a responsibility to make a difference to elevate and support your campuses and extended communities. So thank you, and I look forward to the remainder of the program. So thanks, Robert, for this opportunity.
Xavier, thank you, and I can't thank you and your team enough for stepping up and really making this happen. I'll hit one of the other elements that I think is crucial here, but the executive leadership of these two corporate partners have seen the opportunity and the benefit to society that can be achieved by addressing these systemic challenges faced by our HBCUs and their students. Through their partnership and generous contributions of time, talent, and dollars, we're now able to initiate a long overdue transformation of the technical infrastructure of our HBCUs. As an added bonus, both are interested in integrating interns via our internx.org platform. All of you have students on the internx platform, by the way, from all your respective schools, in the overall implementation to provide hands-on experience, certification, and opportunity for these students during the delivery of this technology platform, which I think is crucial. And we will now enable hopefully hundreds of students now to be able to participate outside of the HBCUs with high quality certification and training through these two great corporate partners. The SFI team continues to work with other corporate partners who are equally committed to addressing the totality of the HBCU ecosystem with holistic solutions that are sustainable for the long term. So more on that later. As we finalize additional corporate partners similarly committed to providing time, talent, and dollars to the furtherance of the HBCU ecosystem, the SFI team will notify you and your staffs to make sure that they get integrated properly into your current infrastructure. So with that, I'd like to now welcome Dr. Michael Lomax, who has been a longstanding partner, great friend, and advocate of all things to improve the quality of experience for all of our students, who is, of course, you know, the president and CEO of UNCF. So with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Lomax. Michael?
Thank you very much, Robert. And this is an exciting and historic day for HBCUs and for UNCF. And I think when we look back a decade from now on what we began doing here, we're going to understand just how important this day really is. And just in case some of us have forgotten, almost 15 months ago, when we were introduced to the issue of COVID and the need to shut down our campuses and to go virtual, we saw how reliant we are on the technological infrastructure of our campuses, and we saw how much work we had to do just in the short term to be able to continue to educate the students who were reliant upon us. We've come a long way over those 15 months. Extraordinary support from the federal government, extraordinary support from philanthropy, begun by Robert Smith, and bringing a whole new group of philanthropists in support of our work. And in many ways, our institutions, you know, have been insulated from the worst elements of the COVID pandemic and the economic impacts by the support that we've received both from philanthropy and from the federal government. But today, what we're doing is really building for the future and ensuring that we're never caught short-handed again technologically when we face the crises which we know will occur. So I consider this a very important day. And I want to thank I want to thank our two corporate partners who are here today, Cisco and ABC Technologies. Xavier, it's great to see you. Francine, it's wonderful to meet you. I think we're going to become better friends even than we are today over the months ahead. We look forward to working with you, and thank you for your generous and powerful commitment. You're setting the standard for others. I want to thank all of my many colleagues from our HBCUs who are here today, and we have a very strong turnout. So I think, Robert, that really suggests how important they think, we think this issue is. And I'm delighted that UNCF is going to be on this journey with our colleges and universities, because this is a journey UNCF has to take as well. Our HBCUs collectively move well over $1 billion each year in Title IV funding alone through IT systems. And the personal data of our students and our would-be students to what is maintained is comparable to what is maintained by the Internal Revenue Service. Without the proper campus cybersecurity, all of this could be at risk for our institutions and for our hundreds of thousands of students. As you will learn in today's presentation, keeping those resources secure and off of the black market is critical to our future existence and professional reputations, all of which is better secured with the IT infrastructure upgrades that will be discussed today. None of us can do this work, this upgrading alone. Now, And that's why the words that we've already heard today, partnership and collaboration and sharing, are so critical to the future that we see in front of us. Several efforts have been taken to fix IT infrastructure over the history of our HBCUs. I know our college presidents and our individual institutions have made those efforts. I certainly did when I was president of Dillard University. But our challenges really that we met were not just the culture that says I'm a little reluctant to change, or maybe I'm a lot reluctant to change, but also the cost of the initial investments, and also the need to sustain and continue to modernize over time. IT changes require a sustainment and modernization plan and the resources behind that plan. This time may be uniquely different because of the level of philanthropy and the holistic approach of the Student Freedom Initiative team and our corporate sponsors. We are grateful for the expertise and the philanthropy of Cisco, of AVC Technologies, and others. However, as we approach this, we must also consider the end state, including how we work together to budget for modernization and sustainment efforts in the future. This is where we call upon the leadership that is on this Teams call today, that is gathering here, to be open to collaborating as necessary to sustain this initial investment. We have got to work together. There is no alternative. Finally, this is a unique time in the history of philanthropy for HBCUs, as well as in the history of federal government support for our HBCUs. Some might argue that this is unprecedented. This is a moment within a generation. From the gifts of Robert Smith, and I just want to say they began with Robert Smith, to Mackenzie Scott, to Michael Bloomberg, to Reed Hastings and Patty Quillen, and to many others, we have seen a level of support that is unprecedented for HBCUs. So this is extraordinary. We have to take full advantage and leverage this moment. Therefore, it is so important that we move out of this moment and move forward from this time as a team to take full advantage of this unique time and the resulting opportunity. At UNCF, we've learned what a great partner SFI is. And we've learned what a great team Robert has assembled at SFI. And so it's my pleasure to, and we know that because we've all worked with Keith Schultz and my fellow board member at SFI, Linda Wilson. We got a great team, but we've also got a new team leader at SFI, and it's my pleasure to introduce him. You've already heard from Mark Brown, but let me tell you a little bit about him. Mark serves as the executive director of the Student Freedom Initiative. Mark knows HBCUs. He is a Tuskegee University graduate. He's a tiger. So we know that he knows our HBCUs. He was the recent chief operating officer of the Federal Student Aid Program within the Department of Education. Talk about a tough job to undertake.
You understand what I'm saying?
And he is a retired U.S. Air Force general with more than 30 years of distinguished service. So it is my pleasure to turn the program over to our new team leader, Mark Brown. Mark, program's yours.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Lomax, for those comments, and thank you to our chairman and certainly to our corporate sponsors. So as we get into it, on the next chart here, Keith and I are going to take you from the larger strategy down to, no kidding, the tactical actions that we need to collectively take to get this done, and we'll do that really over the next 20 minutes or so. Next slide, please. So as was earlier mentioned, this pictorial slide of historical donations dates back to the historic gift of Morehouse College. And I will note that that gift is 2 years old exactly today. 19 May, class of 2019, 2 years ago, the anniversary is today. But that set off a string, we believe, of philanthropic gifts to HBCUs. Now, all of these gifts are significant when viewed individually. But as we think strategically, we want you to imagine the potential impact had they represented a single combined investment. Is it possible to build a fund? For now, let's call it an endowment without walls that would scale to all HBCUs in perpetuity. That's part of the question on the table. That vision is the role and the mission that undercuts the Student Freedom Initiative. It's the potential power, as Dr. Lomax said, of working together. We're going to talk today about one piece of that, and that's the digital divide. On the next slide, I want to briefly remind you before we get down into the details of the IT infrastructure upgrade, I want to remind you of the possibilities and the outcomes of the IT infrastructure upgrades. Let's start with what I call the art of the possible. For example, it was already mentioned the power of moving our institutions to higher research levels and capabilities. Let me give that a little bit of context. Over the last couple of years, the federal government has designated over $20 billion in federal research dollars to be done at universities. R1 is the title that they use for those with the highest level of research. We know that 131 universities are designated as R1. Regrettably, none of those 131 are historically Black colleges or universities. The next designation is R2. There are 11 HBCUs that are designated as R2. IT infrastructures, allowing the ability to work on classified information, is a critical step in the journey to R1 status. We want to, and we envision moving our HBCUs to R1 status and competing for those federal research dollars. We know that talented students may want to go where they can take part in the highest level and most critical research in medical and sometimes in the defense fields and space fields. Much of this can begin or be enhanced by IT infrastructure upgrades. To the right of this chart is 4G, 5G enablement. Previously thought about as a nice to have, we know that that's really a necessity today. We will get on the next chart to some of the outcomes and why we believe all of our schools must be 4G and 5G enabled across the entire campus and even into the communities where they reside. On our next slide, resilience is one of the issues that we're talking about. Resilience can range from the ability to securely back up data during natural disasters, or it can mean pivoting to virtual campuses like many of you had to do or were challenged to do in the recent pandemic. IT infrastructure upgrades. These outcomes include the ability to reach out to non-traditional students in surrounding communities as you develop your virtual campuses, all on that IT infrastructure foundation. And part of our platform today is an acceptable response to the Department of Education mandate to comply with campus cybersecurity requirements. Later in this brief, Keith Schultz will explain how we commit to every participant's reaching compliance. Every participant will reach compliance at no cost. A necessity for being able to securely receive Title IV funding and protect student personal information data. Title IV funding is necessary in many cases for student enrollment, where most of our students are to some degree needs-based and receiving Title IV funding. If you notice, much of this system of being compliant is but one piece here, though, because after you are compliant, then there is the opportunity to uniquely move to the auxiliary services that your own unique strategic planning has for your school. Let's go to the next chart. If you note the foundational piece at the bottom of this chart, that gray area that goes east to west, that gray shaded piece denotes the requirement to be compliant with the National Institute of Science and Technology campus cybersecurity requirements. You will hear us use the acronym in the brief, NIST. That's what's needed to comply with the federal government requirements. That's what I mean when I say what our teams will do for each school at no cost. However, the auxiliary services will be as unique as the strategic plans designed at each school. Some of you, we know from previous conversations, are interested in additional collaboration tools, while others are interested in modernizing your donor management systems. We know that some want to modernize the student experience from enrollment management to mere registration. And then others are interested in donor and alumni management. All of this, the power of big data analytics, all of this is available once you achieve and build upon this foundational piece that we're discussing today. Here's one example on the next chart. Our 2U system, this operating system, is being used by many universities. This is an independent Gallup report. What the report looked at was the impact of the digital environment and which schools were doing it the best. Now, this is not an endorsement of 2U, but rather the outcomes of the study. I'll leave it to you to read the study, but the schools identified, and this is a subset of them, achieved very favorable results in the areas of equitable education experience. The study talks about the relationship of cost to attend school to the experience. Career fulfillment. The study speaks to what happens after graduation, outcomes. Increased earnings. The study looks at the earnings of some of the graduates. Now, no study, as you know, is absolute and without its limitations, and this one is no exception. But it does catch our attention that the schools noted as highly competitive and listed in this area included only 2 historical Black colleges and universities, Morehouse and Norfolk State. Arguably, all of our schools to compete in the 21st century must have the capabilities created in the fully digital environment, including the ability to expand their campuses beyond the limitations of brick and mortar. So we come full circle. On the next slide, you see the reason for the Student Freedom Initiative. All of what I just mentioned is core to our mission. We're a 501c3 organization. We're not here for profit, but we are dependent on the philanthropy of individual and corporate sponsors like those that you heard from today. There's no cost to you for the support of what we will discuss and to the point of making you compliant. All of our work and everything that we will do as we engage with you on your campuses is built on 3 core principles. We will always be student-centric. The information and decisions we make will be evidence-based, and we will take a holistic approach. Outcomes, student outcomes. There are 4 parts to our program. We'll target most on the 4th one, but you should know that the first is the income contingent financing alternative. Our income contingent alternative is a direct challenge to Parent Plus loans or other commercial loan products that create unnecessary debt, we believe, on our students and limit their freedom. Tutoring, mentoring, and other services, you know the power of tutoring and mentoring. I will mention on the other services, we offer emergency micro grants for minor dollar amount emergencies that the data tells us keep students sometimes from persisting to graduation. That can be everything from a broken down car to a family death, where because of the fragile economic situations, a student may not return to school. Due to the philanthropy of our sponsors, we cover those costs, those small dollar costs as determined by the schools. Internships, already mentioned, is that many, if not all of your students, or you have students participating in InternX, a platform that includes Fortune 100 companies matched with the talent on your campuses. The data tells us that 2 paid internships, STEM majors, good outcome. And so we are interested in continuing to move students to the InternX platform. Finally, and then the subject of today's brief, targeted HBCU capacity building, making you competitive, continuing to make you competitive with your peers in the 21st century, this piece of which we believe starts today with the IT infrastructure upgrade. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our Chief Operating Officer, someone who's been here from the very beginning of this effort and from the ground up, Keith Schultz.
Great. Thank you, Mark. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. Many of you are familiar with the data that's represented on this slide. So I'm not going to spend much time on the particular data. We already know that the endowments of the HBCUs, we understand where they are relative to their peers, but we also understand and recognize that the HBCUs fight well above what I call their weight class. What's important to note in this particular regard is, just as Michael indicated earlier, there is a social reawakening here in the country, and a lot of additional resources are flowing into the HBCUs. We recognize that many of those HBCUs have resources they otherwise would not have had because of this social awakening that's ongoing. And what we want to do as part of the initiative that we're embarking upon with Cisco and their team, as well as the folks from Xavier's team, is to recognize the unique characteristics, whether they be large or small, public or private. We want to come together and collaborate to ensure that the entirety of the ecosystem benefits from the dollars that are being put forth and can take advantage of the opportunities that have been identified by everyone preceding me. If you go to the next slide, this is the art of the possible. What if there were an interconnected environment that allowed those organizations that wanted to proceed with research and development, those organizations who wanted to protect information? What if this infrastructure was in place? What if it was 4 and 5G enabled? What if we had the ability to protect personally identifiable information and at the same time ensure that this infrastructure was resilient, pandemic proof, could house all those capabilities and features that are unique to your individual organizations? What if this was NIST compliant? Picture the opportunities. This architectural construct has been done. It's been done in multiple organizations previously. And we believe this long-term perspective of how we can work together with shared services across the HBCUs that actually protect the HBCU's significant and unique data is where we should be headed. Not today, but on a path towards that. And the way that we're going to enable that is through ensuring through our partners we can achieve this NIST compliant infrastructure. If you can go to the next slide, please. In addition to being student-centered, evidence-based, and holistic, as Mark indicated, a large portion of the work that we complete on all 4 components of the program are done through a series of partners. Previously, you heard with regard to ABC Technologies and their team. You'll see this later in the presentation, but their primary responsibility working with the team is to ensure that we've completed the assessments that are necessary to ensure that we achieve what's identified as level 3. But in addition to just doing the assessments, based on the products and services that'll be made available by Cisco, they'll be working with your respective teams to ensure that those gaps that are identified are mitigated through those services and products that are made available by Cisco. And so they'll be working with your teams to actually do the installation of that equipment. Cisco, the products and services that are going to be installed, and again, in both cases, that's services that are provided by ABC Technologies, as well as those by Cisco, are being provided based on their generous contributions at no charge to the HBCUs. Likewise, Robert indicated the access to the InternX platform, through which Linda and her team make available the learning management platform and that system to ensure that those students who seek certifications as well as internships can actually have the ability to pursue those through that platform. And Michael and his team, and you'll be seeing part of the results of their body of work, is working with us on what we've identified as a longitudinal study to ensure that we've got good data, because again, we're evidence-based, to ensure that we know the specific data that's important. How much are the Title IV funds across just the HBCUs? What are the characteristics of the HBCUs relative to the risk associated with being NIST compliant? So we'll work that through, and many of you will see that as one of the actions coming forward. So we build around this team to ensure that we remain evidence-based, holistic, and student-centered. And so if you can go to the next slide, please. What does success look like? You'll notice that each of the organizations or stakeholders has a specific view of success. We've commented, everyone up to this point, as well as I, in terms of, yes, we want to make certain that, yeah, we're compliant with the cybersecurity requirements reflected within the NIST. We want to make certain that the Title IV funding is maintained. But those are just the enablers. Our actual measures of success center upon something much more important than just the enablers. And that is, how do we improve the competitiveness, efficiency, and resilience that Robert mentioned? How do we ensure that the institutions and students have improved outcomes? How do we make sure we have a set of strategic partners such as Cisco, ABC Technologies, Fund2 Foundation, and many others? How do we make sure that those resources that they're bringing to the table are scalable and repeatable, not just for one set of HBCUs, not just for the Sweet 16, but for the entirety of the ecosystem? How do we ensure that we have the opportunities through these immersive experiences for students? How do we ensure that there's an access to talent, diverse talent, for these individuals that are students as well as our corporate partners? And then how do we expose technology to both faculty, staff, and students? You see, we all share the same set of what does success look like, all focused on doing what's in the best interest of not just the public, but the private HBCUs, with just this portion being the enabler tied to the NIST cybersecurity requirements and the Title IV funding that's tied to it. If you can go to the next slide, please. We've been speaking about this recent federal guidance. As many of you are familiar, and others maybe not, the federal student aid identified that the set of cybersecurity requirements, think of them as all of that which is necessary to file your taxes, right? And so that's for the students, that's for their parents, all of the personally identifiable information that allows those financial aid decisions to be made. Michael Lomax indicated that there's $1 billion flowing through the HBCUs tied to Title IV funding. That's what we're here to speak about in these level of details. We had one specific instance where we had the data on an institution, and that mid-size HBCU per year, $112 million. That's the amount that's at risk based on not securing the infrastructure as identified. The other area to keep in mind as part of this discussion is we know that many of you may not have the resources to accommodate achieving this compliance. And that's exactly why we put the team together to ensure that resources were not the impediment to ensuring compliance with these cybersecurity requirements. While the Department of Education did not put a timetable on when this needed to be accomplished, many of you are familiar with the recent Colonial Pipeline and the fact that there are bad actors, and those bad actors are seeking those organizations that are most vulnerable, and the educational sector is vulnerable. And so as you'll see by EDUCAUSE's quote here below, it's just not a matter of when, it's a matter of how and through what partnerships we actually achieve this set of requirements that allow us to be NIST compliant and protect this personally identifiable information. So if you go to the next slide, this is the basic reason why the vulnerability of the educational sector is extremely high, and so is the threat and the risk. Of all of the industries, education ranks 17th. But the more important piece, and it was communicated earlier, is it's not just about the dollars. Although there are some $8.5 billion that's being made based on the pirating of educational records, there are other issues that are at play based on a survey that was done here over the last year through all colleges and universities. Reputational risk, the access and loss of either donor information or student information. We want to make certain that as we're going down this path of determining how best to satisfy these requirements, we know what the overall impact is to the HBCUs. So one of the areas that you'll be receiving a request from us on, and we'll talk with later here in the presentation, is while this is what it looks like for all colleges and universities, we're going to narrow down this particular view and identify what the statistics are for HBCUs in particular. We recognize that many of you have gone through a series of cyber attacks, both public and private. And so this is not just some theoretical example of the cost, both in dollars, reputational risk, and access and protection of data. But we do have, if you go to the next slide, but we do have one of your peers who has recently experienced a cyber attack. And as Mark and I had a discussion with Dr. Walters, she graciously agreed to walk us through the experiences that they've had and how they have overcome those experiences. So Dr. Walters, if you're on, I'd like to turn this over to you to provide your feedback. Tougaloo?
Keith, why don't we go on to the next
Yep.
chart? I'll
We
see
sure
if I can bring up Dr. Walters.
Okay, will do. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide and we'll just come back. We've been having a discussion relative to how do we increase the awareness of what these cyber requirements look like? How do we deal with the 109 security controls that are identified as part of the standard? How do we implement not only technology solutions, because this is not just about the technology. While Cisco, AVCT, and SFI will be aiding in assuring that these requirements can be satisfied, there are people, process, governance, activities that are necessary to ensure full compliance and to ensure that everything is repeatable in a systematic method. To be clear, we do know that many of those that are on the call that we've spoken to and others are at various levels of achieving this compliance. Many have spoken to us and they are well on their way because they got the message in December and they started working against these sets of requirements as early as December and January. There are others who are just getting started. And so we fully recognize and understand that where an individual HBCU resides from level 1, 2, or 3 is going to vary. Our intent in working with our corporate partners is to complete the assessment collaboratively with each of your teams to better understand where each of you are relative to achieving the ultimate goal, which is level 3. Xavier and his team, along with our project managers that reside both at SFI, Xavier's team, as well as Cisco, will be working through that set of assessments to determine what the gaps are, and then working with you and your respective teams to close those gaps with solutions that are made available by the Cisco team. So from this perspective, our goal is what? Level 3. We recognize that all of the institutions that are represented on this call may be different, and we're going to work uniquely with each of you to ensure that whatever your unique gaps are, we provide solutions, again, at no cost to you because of the generous contributions of Cisco, AVCT, and potentially others to mitigate those gaps. If you go to the next slide, please. While it appears to be an eye chart, I'm going to spend a little bit of time walking through this respective chart and identify those areas where there's great benefit and or value to be gained. So starting on the left, we've identified what we call cohorts. A cohort is a group of HBCUs. That group of HBCUs initially is what we've identified as cohort 1. There are 7 of your associates, both Claflin, Clark, Hampton, Morehouse, Tougaloo, and Tuskegee, who have already gone through the cohort selection and sequencing activities. There are 2 public institutions, Prairie View and FAMU, that have also gone through that process because they've been working with us over the last 18 months since the completion of the Morehouse gift as we stood up the Student Freedom Initiative. As part of our team, AVC Technologies will be able to cycle through 2 parallel activities where these assessments will take place. You'll notice that there will be a kickoff meeting prior to those assessments. During that kickoff meeting, the 3 project managers from SFI, AVCT, Cisco, as well as your respective staffs will work through a clear understanding of roles, responsibilities, assumptions, dependencies, and everything that is necessary to go through that phase of the overall work, which we anticipate will take 8 weeks. The current cohort 1 schools, and as you heard earlier, Michael Lomax said, we want UNCF to be part of this activity. So not only are the UNCF schools going through the process, but Michael Lomax and his team, Early Reese, Robert Rucker, and so forth, are also part of this process. So we'll accommodate that first set of 9 HBCUs, as well as Michael Lomax and the UNCF team. And the folks from AVCT will be leading it. Coming out of that process, there'll be what identified previously as the gap report. We recognize that different schools are going to be at different places relative to level 1 versus level 3. So coming out of that, we'll have the gap report and the bill of materials that's necessary to accommodate or mitigate those gaps. The Cisco folks, based on their bill of materials, will go off in order. We recognize that the supply chain challenges are real, which many of you have been reading about. So we've notionally identified a 12-week window for that to occur. And going on the other side of the receipt of that equipment, the team of AVC Technologies comes back to the fore. And you'll notice that there is a NIST team A and B and staging and installation teams X and Y. So the way that you would read this is notionally, as we complete the set of NIST assessments for 8 weeks, there will continuously be another series of NIST assessments with subsequent HBCUs. Because there are, in fact, a series of teams that AVCT has dedicated to support the overall activity, again, at no cost to each of you. You'll see an overlay of internship opportunities. Robert indicated earlier the extent to which we leverage the InternX platform that has that learning management system that provides the ability to get certifications for students at our HBCUs. It's during this time frame that opportunity becomes available and more pronounced for the staging at the AVC Technologies facility, and then correspondingly at each of your respective installations, for each of your facilities. Again, you'll notice at the bottom a series of milestone boxes. And again, going into each of those stages, we do recognize that your existing processes, change management, change control, configuration management, all of those types of processes and controls that you have before making modifications to your infrastructure, we and the rest of the team will work in concert with making that happen. Coming out of that installation period, based on the generous contributions of Cisco, we all want to make certain that the products and services that are made available can be appropriately used for the benefit in which they were intended. So Cisco will provide the first year worth of support for the overall activities that are being, overall services and solutions that are being delivered. The key point that you'll see at the bottom of that particular starting window is this long-term support plan. That long-term support plan is intended to ensure that those products and services that are being delivered can in fact be sustained for the long term. Back to the sustainability that Michael Lomax identified earlier, we want to ensure that that which is delivered, because we recognize that the threat is continuously changing. We recognize that technology is continuously changing. So we want to make certain through the teammates that we have that Cisco assists with making sure that that happens. But there is another part, and that's that long-term support plan to ensure that following the 12 months of support provided by Cisco, we do in fact have a plan in place to support that. So this is the process that we'll use going through. There's details that we'll work through with your respective chief information security officers, CIOs, and the like at the level of engagement. And Yvette, who is our project manager, will be working with your respective teams to make that a reality. So on the next slide, just very briefly, our management or governance approach for ensuring that we, again, remain repeatable and consistent in the overall implementation. We'll work, of course, and we'll have members across the entire team at each one of the levels that are identified from the tactical level with your respective CISOs and your data center teams. Because we have a host of parallel activities going on, Yvette and the project managers of Cisco and ABCT will work across the individual cohort school members to ensure that we remain consistent and identify the gaps based on the NIST checklist and the requirements. And then we'll ensure between Mark and I and others that the underlying infrastructure is on a path to closure in a manner that's consistent with any of the other applications that Mark alluded to. He, if you recall, he alluded to the U2U, which looks like a customized learning management system, and others that work in concert with your existing infrastructure modernization plans. So if you go to the next slide, here is what we intend to do going forward. The first item ties back to the $1 billion number that Michael Lomax indicated to validate that we have actual data that reflects the 2019 and 20. Many of you that are on the call, because you're already a member of cohort 1, we already have the IT points of contact to ensure that we can start the process. And so you probably already have received the SFI IT infrastructure survey. That's building out where we, the HBCUs, are relative to the infrastructure and how that is secured. So each of you should have already received the survey. But as we receive the equivalent information from those that are not part of cohort 1, we'll continue through this overall process with a start as early as the early June timeframe for beginning the actual assessments. So with that, if you go to the next slide, we will have not seen any comments that have come in at this point. But again, we do want to open up for any questions that you may have. After we go through questions and answers, Yvette Thomas, who is our project manager, will give a summary of any of the items that either appeared in chat or that we need to close off on for questions and answers. So with that, we do have someone waiting to field questions. It'll be Mark or I or anyone else that's on the call. And if you'll just use the hand feature that's tied to Teams, we'll respond to any questions that you all may have. But that concludes my discussion, and we're open for questions.
Hey, Mark, do we need to go back to the Tougaloo example, or is that something that we'll cover off later another time?
Let me check. I know that Dr. Waters was ready to go, but having some challenges with the mute function. So let me check with Tougaloo and see if that's correct. No, I don't think. I think so. We'll get the Tougaloo example out to you as a part of our notes. And Dr. Waters is ready to go with that, but as I said, she's having some challenges with the mute function right now. But we'll get that information out to you all in the minutes.
Okay.
Mark, there is a question.
Okay.
The question that's been raised is, what has been achieved with the group of schools who SFI has been working with for the last 18 months?
Yeah, that's a great question. Go ahead, and Keith, and outline what we've been doing for the last 18 months with those schools.
For the last 18 months, what we've been doing is collecting the necessary information from the HBCUs to allow them to participate in the initial rollout of the components of the program. In particular, the Student Freedom Agreement, which is the income contingent alternative to Parent Plus. We've rolled out the actual online application for that. It's available on studentfreedominitiative.org is where you can find more information relative to those schools that are participating. We've allowed the schools to identify the majors that are consistent with the National Science Foundation definitions of STEM. And based on the school's definition of those majors, we've rolled with it. So you'll see on the website each of those schools and the majors that they've identified. You'll also see what that product looks like. That's an alternative to Parent Plus. We've completed the necessary training, education, and communication to allow the financial aid professionals and others to most effectively communicate. And through our engagement partners, both Shamir and Janelle, who are on the call, we have dedicated resources that are working with each of the HBCUs to ensure that any issues, concerns that they may have, we can address them as quickly as possible. So over the last 18 months, that's what we've been doing. But most importantly, we've been listening, because we recognize that we don't know everything. And so we've been getting great feedback from the schools that are currently participating at the working level, the mid-level, as well as the presidential level at each of the college and universities. So on behalf of all of the staffs that we have, thank you for those that are participating in terms of getting us to the point where the program is live, and it does start taking students' applications now for students that are juniors and seniors for the fall of 2021. And we're providing up to $20,000 per year for those students to participate in the program after they've used federally subsidized, unsubsidized institution and so forth. So that's what's been going on over the last 18 months.
So Keith, we have another question, and I will kind of summarize that question as, what if we don't have a talented IT staff at the moment? How do we participate? So that's not required. In fact, the point here is that we're going to meet you where you are. And so we fully appreciate the fact that in some cases, nothing has been done with the NIST 800 checklist that went out. In other cases, it's more developed. The very first step is an assessment. And during that time, we will bring the talent to you. And that's when we will work together. So we're going to meet you where you are. It's okay if you're not, if you have not invested in this area in the past. And we realize that that's one of the reasons that we are doing this. Another question was on the schedule. So yes, we will be producing a schedule in the very near future. Those cohort 1 schools that we named, because they've already done those data requirements, are the first out of the box for that. I will tell you that in the next 2 to 3 weeks, our teams will be on the ground at Prairie View, but we will make public a schedule to you in the near future that will also include the UNCF schools as we get the data, as Keith suggested on his last chart.
Hey, Mark, just as a data point for the individual who asked, what if you don't? One of the areas that we recognize, because we had spoken to many of you with regard to not having an experienced IT staff, because we heard what you were saying, one of the team members that we're going to be adding to Yvette's team is an experienced Chief Information Security Officer, to make sure she has technical expertise to help offset those of you who may not have that set of expertise right now. So we heard you. That was part of what we've been doing over the last 18 months, trying to figure out and determine where you all were. And based on your feedback, some of you that you did not have those expertise, we will be providing an on-staff resource to assist those who need it.
Let me add one other piece here to that question. It's not just about bringing hardware, putting hardware in and leaving. We are as interested in the future governance of this and in an affordable way. There was mentioned briefly this issue of shared services or common services. We're going to explore with you what works best, sometimes as a cluster or however it needs to be done in a manner that allows a long-term both budgeting and sustainment for IT systems, because we know that these are not things that you simply put in and leave, but that you have to have a way to maintain, upgrade over time and manage. And we also know that IT talent is scarce and also very expensive. One other thing to keep in mind is as you think through this, what if that talent is grown as a part of your student body? What if some of that talent is a part of your student body? Reimagining, if you would, a different kind of work study, a different kind of internship, where that support is being provided on the campus. We look forward to exploring all of that with you as we go through this, both short-term and the long-term keeping of this requirement.
Mark, there is another question, and I'll summarize it. Is there technical advice and insight available for non-cohort institutions that are currently making investments?
The answer to that is yes. We will work the timing. Everybody on the call will do those data sheets. And as you pass those data sheets in and we assign engagement partners with you, then we're partnering with you. So if you have questions before we get to your school or before you're in a particular cohort, we're going to work with you and get you those answers. This is a customer-client relationship. So the answer to that is absolutely yes. As we get your information, we get you lined up, we're going to help bring that expertise to you. And it may be before we're actually at your school for an installation.
There is a question mark with regard to how are institutions determined for each cohort and what is the time frame for each cohort. I'll take it just to clear. In the discussion that I gave you relative to cohort 1, those cohort 1 schools, it required about 4 months to get the cohort 1 schools in a position to be in quote cohort 1. That set of activities was tied to the income contingent alternative. That schedule is predicated upon the FAFSA schedule. This activity that we're speaking of need not follow the same schedule onboarding because it's not linked to the FAFSA schedule. So when Mark indicated we'll get a schedule out to you, we will put forth that schedule, and that schedule is tied to the work that Xavier and company can do. Because if you remember from that schedule, it had 2 teams that were in green working for 8 weeks. Well, that set of activities, in terms of the NIST assessments, once that team is finished, we always do a pause to determine best practices and lessons learned, and that's no different. And so once we do that pause, best practices, lessons learned, that team of 2 that you saw as A and B on the NIST assessments can continue going through that. But the process that will be used for cohorts for the tech modernization, it will be different fundamentally from the process used for tying to the FAFSA schedule for the income contingent alternative. So just a slight distinction, but we think we can actually bring HBCUs on much faster for this component than we do for the other. So just a distinction so that people are aware on that one.
Okay, I also see a question about sharing information from other schools that may have more developed programs. The short answer to that is yes. And when we talk about collaborative services and providing information, that's in part what we mean, how we can help schools do this together, similar to what Dr. Lomax mentioned earlier in his comments. I believe that Dr. Walters has called in and will be able to be heard now via phone. Let me check with Dr. Walters and see. Are you there, ma'am?
I am here. Can you hear me, Mark?
I can. Thank you so much. I'll say it must have been a cyber attack. Let's go with that for now.
Over the river and through the woods to Mark House. How are you this morning? What a wonderful meeting, and thank you, Mr. Smith, for what you are doing for historically Black colleges. Mark, it's been a pleasure working with you, and Keith, thank you. We've been together from the beginning, and I just want to thank everyone for being patient with me trying to get on. We were attacked in January of this year. We received a note for 25 Bitcoin in order for us to recover our data, and so that was tragic for us. Luckily, a few weeks before, we had signed a contract to outsource our IT, and they were working with us to prepare the documents and all to get ready to do this contract when this attack happened. We were crippled for more than 2 weeks, not being able to get email, not being able to process any documents, release transcripts. We were stuck in our tracks, and this company had to work around the clock, bringing in extra staff, boots on the ground, to help us get through this tragic challenge. And we are still recovering data and working through that with our partner, Elution. These kinds of attacks hit you out of nowhere. No matter what we were doing at that time, we were not prepared for this attack. And had it not been for the beginning of the semester and the classes had already started, we would have been in dire straits trying to register students. So I'm grateful for where we are today. And Keith, I'm thankful that you guys are discussing this and the importance of this matter, because we were totally caught off guard. We were not prepared.
And for people's education, 25 Bitcoin today is about $1 million, just to give a sense for the type of ransom that they were demanding.
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Walters, and I think that brings us to the reality of the situation that we've discussed. You knew about the pipeline, and now there's some insight to a peer school where this has actually happened. So I do see a question on a CMMC assessment, and if we would be doing that as certified by NSA. I'm gonna take that one for the record, so we can make sure we get you an accurate answer. But just so you note that I do see that question. But we will look at that specific assessment to make sure it's within what we are discussing.
Hey, Mark, there was one question that came up relative to the ability to share lessons learned and best practices from other HBCUs. Yes. Well, I'm not going to call out any of the HBCUs in particular, but there's one school in Orangeburg, South Carolina, that reached out because one of the other schools was having needed help. They basically needed help. And so to Michael's point about collaboration, that school in Orangeburg, South Carolina did not think twice about reaching out and helping one of the other institutions make that happen. Another school on the Gulf Coast that's also on the call basically said, you know what, we're in the process of modernizing our infrastructure, and we believe that we may be open to sharing our infrastructure as that graphic that I walked through in terms of the communication graphic. We might be open to making certain that those resources are shared across those schools that are in our region. So there's already, Michael, to your point from earlier, some of the member schools that are on the call are already reaching across and helping other schools where they have best practice lessons learned in capacity that some of the other HBCUs don't have. So those two schools, and you know who you are on the call, shout out and thanks for offering up that support to your sister schools.
I don't believe we see any further questions in the chat. If there are questions in the chat and we miss them, we certainly will get back with you. Let me ask Yvette if you recorded any action items for us today.
The one action item that we didn't answer was the NSA one that you said you're going to take offline, and I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. So with that said, let me again kind of end where I began. We believe this is an amazing opportunity. We are very grateful for our corporate sponsors and for the leadership giving us the vision for what we're doing. Our next step is to get those assessments in, as Keith outlined. You'll get a message shortly after this meeting that reiterates what those deadlines and the data requests are, and we're moving out. The team will be on the ground in a matter of weeks at Prairie View, and the schedule will continue on for that. Keith and I will be out to communicate with you. We offer our services to go deeper on this if you wish. Our project leader, Yvette Thomas, will be available as well. So again, thank you very much for giving us some part of your very busy schedule today. And seeing no further questions, I will again say thank you and end our session at this moment.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.